as the position for wildland firefighters. So each of those 50 members came from various different backgrounds from throughout the United States. Some of you may remember that this commission was established by the bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and focusing on how we can really address recommendations for Congress, because this is a report to Congress. But the thing I really like telling people is that don't think that this is just that the actions here are just focused on Congress, because there's a lot of things that we can do as private citizens working in associations and or nonprofits that can be quite instrumental as well. The consensus-based process was new to me in that all reports or all recommendations in this report had to reach unanimous consensus. So you can imagine 50 people from very, very broad, diverse backgrounds trying to reach consensus on recommendations was quite deliberative and contentious at times as well. Not all recommendations made the report. And so those are intriguing as well, that I have spent some time on too. So, but I really like the fact that all these members have come together to make the unanimous consensus report recommendations. And I think there's tremendous value as a starting point. All right. So we had 1 year to make these recommendations to Congress, and we were able to make that milestone. And then we're impaneled as commission members for another 180 days. So I will be involved as requested through either the coordinators with the commission and or providing testimony on the Hill, any number of things that is unique to a request for commission members to provide additional information and context to the report. But I think some people are already kind of thinking that this work goes well beyond the 180 days, but in terms of a formal panel or commission members, it'll end in March. That's who we are, 14 federal members, but 36 state, NGO, and academic. Myself was the primary one with the most wildland fire experience on the committee. Other folks definitely had a fire background, but didn't come from the wildland community. Here's how the report and the issues are interrelated and overlap with one another. And again, you know, the deliberative process within the last year was very fast paced and very in depth, very quickly. But these are the emerging themes that came out of the report. We're in dire need of urgent new approaches, both holistic and comprehensive structures beyond what we currently know, and that we've been using for the last 70 years within our existing systems. Some of that is in the report as well in terms of making recommendations, but we don't necessarily make recommendations on actions. And that's where groups like this, I think, can be very instrumental in like, okay, so here's the recommendation. How do we actually put actions to that? Collaboration got a lot of interest in terms of shared decision-making, because I think there's been this perspective that the collaboration's been quite limited and it's not allowing other voices in the room in terms of participating in the wildfire crisis. What that looks like is, you know, NGOs, nonprofits, you know, organizations, associations, local place-based collaboratives really got a lot of attention in this particular theme, in hopes of really creating a foundation at a community level that really brings community leaders together in a collaborative process. You know, rather than say, for example, the Forest Service comes out with a proposed action, it really isn't. Yes, we have ID teams, but in the emerging field here, how do we increase that collaboration to include more partners and community leaders, with the intent of really establishing strong actions on the landscape to help mitigate the crisis. Proactive action in the planning, mitigation, and recovery within the crisis is really important. So there's a lot of work and development looking at the mitigation, prevention, and planning with it at the community level that can also be increased. Enabling beneficial fire. So this really got a lot of attention in our commission, and it includes not just intentional fire on wildfires, but also prescribed fire and the enhancement of cultural fire practitioners and more tribal engagement with tribal members that have traditional ecological knowledge in terms of applying fire on the landscape. This is especially true in fire adapted ecosystems and around communities, and thinking about ways that we can really increase this going forward. We did have a lot of discussions around terminology and language. And for me, for all of us, it can be kind of maddening to think about how these terms have changed over the last 30 years. It used to be prescribed natural fire, wildland fire use. Most recent one that we're probably mostly familiar with is managed wildfires. And it's I'm trying to get folks to understand, or trying to anchor to the 2009 federal fire policy that really describes wildland fire policy in two different buckets, if you will, prescribed fire and wildfires. And in that wildfire continuum, you have opportunities, if it's in the land and resource management plan, regarding the use of fire for both protection objectives and resource objectives. So there's a lot of work to be done in that space for sure. The workforce is near and dear to my heart. That's why I have done the work that I've been doing within grassroots and participating on this commission within the workforce. This did expand to some degree within a holistic workforce, but primarily it is focused on the idea of creating a workforce for on the front end of the mitigation and management and prevention piece of it, not just response. So, we've had this, conversation about, how many more firefighters, how many more aircraft, what more do we need? The hard thing about this is we know that we've been successful with extinguishing about 98% of our wildfires. And so there's got to be, more an open our concept more with this workforce and how this workforce can be sustainable into the future. And when firefighters, entry-level firefighters, are paid less than, service and retail workers, it's really hard to keep that federal investment in our workforce engaged in what they're doing. We have a lot of obstacles in terms of recruitment, retention, lack of career ladders, lack of promotion. 15 years, people are still at a GS7. So it's really, really tough for this incredible investment that we have in our workforce for them to see themselves and pencil out a retirement. And so we really want to focus in on the holistic piece of the workforce. Again, not just, response workforce, but the whole workforce and what that might look like. Then modernizing tools for decision-making, science, data, and technology. I was not on that particular work group, but this seems to be exploding in all sorts of different realms in terms of science, data, and technology. There is a concern that there's a lot of individual efforts being made by unique companies, but there's really not a way to aggregate all this information that's really exponentially increasing, especially as it comes as it pertains to drones and detection systems. But there's a lot more out there that really needs to be incorporated, from the pre-event to the event to the post-event. And then investing in resilience and dedicated and sustained funding. Really, some of the conversations there are around appropriations and how can we kind of think about investments that are scaled more 2 to 5 year. This idea, we've heard it time and time again, that single year appropriations and investments just isn't getting us where we need to be. So we need to think about how we can expand this longer term. And so the report is organized by chapters in terms of before, during, and after the wildfire. And the foundation for success is pretty self-explanatory. Chapter 2, protecting public health. A lot of what came out of this is smoke and smoke management and its impact on human health, as well as on firefighter and community health and protection. Lots of discussions about, especially as we try to expand the use of, beneficial fire. What does that mean for increasing PM 2.5 and the impacts to human health? So that we had a really good commission member from the EPA, knowing that we have to continue with beneficial fire on the landscape, but having further restrictions and regulations on prescribed fire, as well as wildfire for resource objectives, has to be part of the equation. Then chapter 3 is responding to fire. What do we do to improve the response coordination? And really what was coming out of this is the extremely constricted pipeline within the NWCG training and qualifications. The feds tend to get the training and qualifications and prioritize because of the agencies that's who they work for. But there's a lot of other people out there that could enhance response. And mainly I'm talking about local fire departments and state agencies that may not necessarily be included in both the statusing and the dispatching of additional resources. So we also would really like to be able to think about local individuals at a county and a state level that really don't work for fire agencies, but that could fill some of our roles in supporting the wildland fires throughout the U.S. And then there's the after the fire and improvement for response or recovering for resilience. And a lot of these tend to be overlapping, but not always. And so we know that with some of these really large, severe wildfires, we're having really significant major impacts on watersheds, on carbon sequestration, water capture and storage, biodiversity. And so thinking about how we can create this resilience into the future is also really important. And then 5 is that pertains to all of these chapters, is building a workforce, integrating science and technology, and then of course, investing in tomorrow. Okay, so who are the committees within Congress that this report is going to that are most interested in our work? Is certainly on the Senate side is Energy and Natural Resources, Ag and Forestry, Homeland Security, Public Works, and Appropriations. And within the House side, it's Natural Resources, Ag, Homeland Security, Ways and Means, and Appropriations. So needless to say, there was tremendous interest from staffers, legislative aides, legislative assistants, and directors that were part of our conversations when we were in DC last week. So needless to say, I think you're going to see quite a few potential bills come out from this report already. A little bit of background on how this report kind of came about is the work groups were really the engine of the report. There were 10 work groups. I participated in at least 3, the landscapes, the response coordination, and the workforce. So those were the 2 that I have the most knowledge of in terms of some of the deliberations that we have gone through, as well as what actually made it in the report. And I did tell Sharon at the end of our discussion, I'll pull up the report. At the very end of the On Fire report, the last few pages has all the 148 recommendations in the report. Probably not worth going through them all at this point, but they are consolidated at the end of the report. So here are the groups. The aviation report was issued soon after we convened, so that's publicly available. The cohesive strategy, what I really liked about this is that it was a refresh process, if you will. The cohesive strategy wasn't really aligned with any sort of overarching group. And so WIFLC, Wildland Fire Leadership Council, is now the steward, if you will, of the national cohesive strategy. And I believe that all the regional cohesive strategies have renamed themselves as regional wildland fire leadership councils. I was a little unnerved by that because I think WIFLC has a known, it's a known entity, and the people that are involved, and now it's been renamed or retermed within these, and it could be fine, but I think folks just need to know that they have decided on that, and WIFLC will be the steward of the cohesive strategy. Communities, lots of work there if you're interested at all in the mitigation, prevention, planning, lots of stuff going on there with hardening communities and what can we do with, even though this reports to Congress, you can use some of these recommendations at a local level with county board of supervisors, county commissioners, folks that are really involved in regulations, and looking at different codes that can and should be used within our communities. Landscapes, of course, that was the one I was on, regarding prescribed fire, active forest management, local forest and industry wood utilization. So there's some, I think, some nuggets of wisdom in there as well that I really liked. We've had several subject matter experts, both from, the timber industry, provide input, as well as new and emerging technology for non-merchantable timber that could be used to be sequestered in building material, at a local level. So people tend to be really kind of interested in that. And then how can, even though I think we've had some like stewardship contracting where some of the receipts can remain local, there's still quite a bit of interest in, if we are going to be removing, biomass off the landscape and sequestering it, locally, or if there's the ability to retain receipts locally, how do we go about doing that? We did get into a discussion and had another ad hoc regarding NEPA revisions, and we couldn't come to consensus on what kind of revisions that we needed to make for NEPA. I still think there's plenty of room there in the future to think about, what works with NEPA, what needs to be refined and revisited to actually help things become, help our projects become more streamlined. But again, that could be, a topic for another day as well. Post-fire response coordination, I talked about that. Public health and infrastructure appropriations was pretty intriguing in terms of new and emerging and novel ideas on how we can extend appropriations for larger, more sustainable projects. And then workforce. So those are the 10 topics that, after probably about 2 or 3 months, that began to kind of winnow out as to, what are the key topics that we really need to stay focused on. Let's see. So I think this is where are the opportunities for non-congressional action? People ask me that quite a bit as well. There is the federal interagency coordination group. There's administrative actions that the agencies can take. And so even though we did want to try to define topics that might have been of value to all the federal agencies in terms of some of the things that they can do. We've been real engaged. There's several, Jayla Paul Rivera is in our group, as well as Jeff Rupert, and then a number of other different federal members from the fire administration as well. So we're hoping that this can also be a springboard for the agency to sink in and create potential revised agency policy. Some of the discussions that have been ongoing as well regarding agency policy is like, what kind of policies do we have that are old and outdated that actually need to be removed? And I like this concept that by by subtracting certain policies that maybe some of these policies no longer serve us well. And then by removing certain policies are actually additive and provide a value because some of these policies no longer serve us well in the wildfire crisis. So that's an intriguing space that I'm interested in as well, is that it just feels like we just keep creating more and more policy, when in reality, we might actually have to take a harder look at existing policy and remove some of those. And Congress is willing to take a hard look at that things that are established by law that could be, revised or removed. We're not there yet, but that's just a thought for y'all to consider. The other avenue is through the Wildland Fire Leadership Council, since they do have tremendous amount of state and federal coordination, also non-federal partnerships with tribal and nonprofits. Culture and practice is a big thing that kept coming up here, is how do we identify existing culture that no longer serves us well? What do we like about public land management culture that still serves us well, and the practices that we are currently doing that serve us well, and what are new practices that really need to be amplified in terms of addressing these recommendations. And then truly WIFLC is there established, to really serve all of us for long-term change. And if you don't have, current path, to WIFLC, and I've been telling folks that, if you work on state fire safe councils that work within the regional national cohesive strategy, that can then feed that up to the national cohesive strategy and WIFLC, those groups are going to be listening to what's coming from the ground. They have affirmed that connection is quite important in terms of really bringing everybody to the table. So with that, I am going to end, but there's my information. I'm at kmartin02@gmail.com, and my phone number 208-315-7454. Feel free to reach out. This is part of my pro bono, not getting paid for this, but I guess if you call your, federal annuity being paid, that's me. So I'm more than willing and able, and it's quite an honor to give back to the American taxpayers and the public in this form and fashion. So I'm happy to kind of think about, how we create, good changes, for all of us, for the publics in our communities that we serve. So thanks very much. I'll stop my screen, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I was unable to do chat, but there are notes. I don't know, they seem like different things, but I think I allowed participants to share notes, whatever they are. So I don't know if that would work.
I don't see the chat function either. I guess I can.
Well, no, I think when I changed it, it was too late because the meeting had already started.
Oh, I got
that would be my guess.
Yeah.
So Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, as fast as I was scribbling notes, I failed to catch that last really important point, something about WIFLC open and listening from, the grassroots. Could you elaborate more on that? Because to me, WIFLC is in the upper stratosphere of, so what is that? Did I get that right, or did I get that wrong?
Yeah, no, you got it right. They have been in the stratosphere. So I think during the deliberations that we've had within the commission, and especially within the National Cohesive Strategy, and it was just, one of those things that I brought up that felt like a little bit of a weakness is like, well, who actually sets the agenda for the National Cohesive Strategy? And how do we know that goals and objectives are being met, at the national level of the National Cohesive Strategy? So you will see in the revised document for the cohesive strategy that names, WIFLC as kind of the parent for National Cohesive Strategy. How that bubbles down and boils down is to the 3 regional cohesive strategy committees And then there's a number of people at the state level that are involved in the regional cohesive strategies. So that's how we kind of see from the grassroots, feeding all the way up to WIFLC is getting involved, at that local level, and y'all can probably do a much better job than I can of really identifying where those local connections are that have that direct connection to the regional cohesive strategy, national, and then WIFLC.
Yeah, Michael, you're muted, or yeah.
There we go. Kelly, thanks for that briefing. That was very, very nice. I had kind of fundamentally two questions. Is the investing in resilience, is that forest management or forest maintenance? Is that the focus there?
I'd have to take a look. I do know that came up in the work group within landscapes, but I can also pull that up. I think there was a tremendous interest in forest management and products, and what kind of industry is out there right now that could be developed, locally, maybe a state and private, maybe a federal partnership. I'm unaware of that, but I think that there's enough interest in trying to understand those areas that are at highest risk to a future, severe wildfire in a critical watershed. What, if anything, can and should we do to remove some of that material off the landscape, especially as it through the science and technology that identifies some of these watersheds that have been majorly impacted by wildfires, and that's where I think the local place-based collaboratives will help enhance some of those opportunities.
Okay.
But again, we haven't really come up with actions, and I think you're in a really good, position to anchor those questions, both to the resilience and to the landscape chapter, and see where there's some commonality there.
There's with I'm going to use the word maintenance because that's the one I've been using for the last 3 years. That's critical, forest maintenance, but also in next to that is because of the lack of infrastructure, the idea of maintenance, they go hand in hand. And so as time goes on, we're going to have to look at those in two ways. The other thing that I wanted to look at is there such a is the one on enabling beneficial fire. There is such a dramatic difference in that. Tom, just a few years ago, Tom Harbour and I wrote an article for the Side American Foresters, and we were really pushing, I won't say that, we were really emphasizing the notion of managed fire, or beneficial fire, or let it burn, whatever you want to call it. But the problem is, and I'm a real strong advocate of this, the land conditions right now, and especially in the West, do not allow for the concept of managed fire as we are doing it. It's just not working. And I wonder, when you were recently up on the Hill talking to the members and their staff, did anybody talk about this, the notion of beneficial managed fire and the incredible differences that people have on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We know that, if you think about the arc of, the perspective on, beneficial fire use, let burn, like you said.
Yeah.
It's a big arc, right? And so I think the thing that we're really trying to help people understand is that, fire was here, well before we were, and that every day is a burn day somewhere. And so each geographic area is quite different, and that we have to understand what those differences are. Now, we didn't say that we should allow beneficial fire or a lightning caused fire at the 97th percentile in August, Because I think that we know it's just too unpredictable, right? Those of you that have followed my work at Yosemite, you know, just about every year we were managing a wildfire. And if it was a drought year, we would move up in elevation and allow natural ignitions to play its natural role. And again, not too far departed. Those are very long fire return interval areas, but the areas, you're right, you know, where we have, we were the largest timber producing country in the world in the early 1900s. And so we have a lot of second growth trees that we all know about as well. And now combining that with fire suppression over 100 years and increasing drought, insect, and disease is really impacting landscapes. They're different throughout the US, and we need to recognize that there's some areas that using managed fire or beneficial fire in areas that are highly departed may not be in the public's best interest to allow that at the 97th percentile. But as we start coming down in the fall and we start getting to the 80th percentile or the 70th percentile, doesn't it make sense to actually use fire as a beneficial tool? So we are getting some interest in helping people understand that, you know, not all fires are bad and not all trees are good. So using fire on a landscape scale is a must in terms of, you know, really addressing the wildfire crisis.
Thank you.
Could you explain what you meant by percentile? Just
Oh, sure. Yeah, so our seasonality, we start on the uphill curve in the spring. We're in green up. We have you know, it's fairly moist, you know, fires occurring at the 50th percentile weather event or seasonality. They just don't burn that hot. But as we approach that curve in the top of the season in August, it's at the most extreme. And that's what the 97th percentile is that's the most difficult time to manage a wildfire. But as we come down in the fall, days get shorter, we get more rain, and we have areas that may be more conducive to allowing fire on the landscape that won't be, you know, as hot and as severe. And those are really good conditions to actually start reducing this tremendous amount of fuel buildup on the landscape that's been building up for over a century. Is that if we can conceptualize that as we either start down in the fall and we can apply beneficial fire in these large landscapes that have tremendous amount of dead and dying forest floor fuels on the forest floor, that makes a lot of sense to be able to use that tool. So we did recommend this concept of a relight. So if we put a fire out at that 97th, that top peak in the summer in a really critical watershed that needs fire, let's think about maybe revising policy to think about relighting that area. 10 acres, I don't know. We didn't get into actions there, but how many fires have we put out in those watersheds for the last 100 years that have increased, you know, that if they had been allowed to burn, probably would not have that kind of fuel buildup. So what we're really proposing is that there are windows of opportunity that we can use beneficial fire on the landscape.
Okay, Bob, I guess you were next. Oops.
There we go. I'm going to agree with Michael that these fires need to be put out. The beneficial fire problem is expensive, it's risky. It makes more sense to do a prescribed fire with planned ignitions. My crews did that for 20 years. We did tens of thousands of acres. We never had any slop over, none of so I think the management of fuels is a problem, and the lack of infrastructure is significant. We had manufacturing facilities that could take waste wood and snags and thin for centuries, and now we don't. They've disappeared because of economics. And so a restructuring of the infrastructure is critical for processing those materials so that they can be made into products or made into energy. Rather than having energy released through a wildfire, it could be done to create electricity that also creates jobs. So my interest is in the workforce. In 1966, I started planting trees. In 1970, I started contracting. And for 20 years in Western Oregon, we did not have a single fire 10,000 acres or larger. We had a workforce in the woods that worked year-round. I think my crew was the first one to do year-round work. We never battled a wildfire because we didn't have wildfires. An active workforce and a infrastructure with the year-round employment. Firefighters don't need more money for a short season. They need more work so that they can rent and buy homes rather than just being migrant workers. We've shown how that works. We've been successful at it. We didn't have fires for decades, for generations, and now we have them up the yin-yang, as predicted by me and many others 30 years ago, that if you let these forests go passive, if you remove the roads, if you take away the trained workforces, all of which we've done, you're going to have catastrophic scale wildfires, which we have. So those accurate predictions, I think, need to be paid attention to. We know how to stop these fires. We know how to create local jobs. We know how to have nice homes and that aren't threatened by wildfire, and parks and schools. And so I think a return to past management practices, but refined with modern sensibilities, is the surest path to a safe, attractive, aesthetic forest, a wildlife habitat that doesn't burn the wildlife and smoke. So those are huge changes. They're all based on regulations that have been adopted along with language in the last 90 years. Nobody ever heard of a WUI or went fishing in a wildland. So I think those types of government impositions and acronyms have been extremely detrimental. And I think that the wildfire history of the past 30 years shows that, proves that those systems aren't working. So Kelly, what's your response to that?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Bob. I do know that, you know, from a commission report that we're definitely not recommending that beneficial fire be used everywhere all the time. That's just not, you know, realistic. I'm actually, you know, outside my window, there's a subdivision up here that's just surrounded by state and federal lands. That's just way too dense. If a fire gets going in there, you might as well write that community off, right? And so I think people do know, especially at a community level, that we really do need to think about how we protect, you know, life, and especially property in some of these areas that were truly established, you know, 30, 40, you know, 50 years ago. So I think there's opportunity to still do active forest management in some of these most critical areas, without a doubt. And people really want to see, you know, rural jobs. And so if we did, you know, think about, building up the infrastructure to, you know, support community protection in large areas. I live in Valley County here in Idaho, that there's a group that would be put together, for example, that would recommend, you know, what type of, and where, and help prioritize, you know, where those actions can occur. But I will tell you, the commission overwhelmingly agreed with the need for beneficial fire and the return for beneficial fire on the landscape. And the fact that, you know, the oppression and the extermination of fire on the landscape has gotten us where we are. So we absolutely need to bring it back. I do believe that we need better science. There is a recommendation for a fire environment center, similar to what we stand up for hurricanes, right, and tornadoes, that the National Weather Service and predictive services can better help us prepare for managing beneficial fire on the landscapes. I'm not really prepared to kind of talk about pods, potential opportunity of delineations, but that's also in the report of looking at, you know, to your point, if we can think about doing large landscape prescribed burning in the fall as we come off the peak, or maybe we even burn in the wintertime, which will create a tremendous amount of smoke impact because we just can't get the lift and transportation of smoke. And that's why a lot of issues with prescribed fire has come up in the past, is like when it's acceptable to apply large landscape fire, it's almost, we don't have those same kind of environmental conditions to help protect human health. So to your point, I appreciate your determination that we need to build up the infrastructure. But I do believe that taking that to the public and to our communities at large and having that discussion to think that Congress is going to fix this or agencies are going to fix this just is not going to happen. We really have to get at the local level and provide very transparent information with what's possible on the landscape, because we have very little time, to lose. And there's pretty much general agreement that we can't put out all fires, and nor should we.
I would just say that being proactive and not having the fires in the first place is a better strategy than being reactive and building institutions and having trained people and increasing wages and building up the wildland firefighting community as a career potential has proven to be a obvious failure. That these let it burns and passive management processes have resulted in these catastrophic scale fires as predicted, and we know how to alleviate that. We've done it in the past, and it does involve putting out fires when they start to protect communities and homes and so on. So I would just say the record of the last 30 years shows that passive management is an obvious failure, and that's documented, and we shouldn't be encouraging and continuing it. We should change direction dramatically, and we know how to do that.
Thanks, Bob. I think the next questioner was Sue. So go ahead, Sue.
Thanks. Let's see. I just want to register, Bob, don't agree with you, and really think that we need to be able to use unplanned ignitions for resource benefit. And we do that in California. And so that is how we're going to shift the landscape here, because we're not going to actively manage 100% of the, I mean, we're not going to actively manage the way you describe it, 100% of this landscape. It's not accessible. And so it's not accessible because it's too steep. And the fire that we want to see that's not a prescribed fire, but it's highly variable, is a natural process. It's an ecological process that is the best tuning fork for this landscape. And so I just want to, I don't really want to cause us to get into a debate here. I follow, Smokey, and I've heard you on that in that forum. I'm not interested in the debate here, but I want you to understand that there's a informed group out here that do not agree with you. But Kelly, thank you for, the presentation and giving a sense of the scope. And I was really encouraged when I saw the support for beneficial use of fire. I'm curious, in your briefings or conversations with the congressional folks, the staffers and whatnot, do you have a sense of things that they're interested in terms of focusing legislation? And I think I'm less interested in money, because that's just so hard. And money comes in various amounts and in different ways depending on our economy and many other things. But how about policy sides? There's sort of a policy side of the recommendations, and I was looking through them. Are there things in there that you felt that you got a little bit of bite from some people?
I will tell you, when we developed the NEPA ad hoc, that, and this has to do with my position and my support for beneficial fire, and I know that, and it's fine. Bob, I just want to appreciate and respect your opinion. So this is not against you whatsoever, but and it's great, because I think this is a great group on both ends of the spectrum, and being able to be respectful and hear each other is a really great thing. But what I'm curious about, and some of the lawmakers are too, in terms of forest plan revisions, I'm just going to talk about Forest Service right now, is we know that a lot of agencies are either already have the use of fire in their land and resource management plan. And the Forest Service does things a little differently in terms of using the wildland fire decision support system or kind of their documentation about how they're going to manage a wildfire on the landscape for both protection and resource objectives. As a matter of fact, I don't even think they call it resource objectives. The Forest Service won't. But if the Park Service, for example, produces a fire management plan in collaboration with other partners, say the Forest Service and community leaders, that becomes the document supporting the land and resource management plan, rather than having to do a separate NEPA document for a prescribed fire. So we've talked about this in terms of the tremendous amount of human and fiscal capital that has to go into CEs or EAs every time you want to do a prescribed burn. After 4 years, people end up moving and changing. Anyway, there is appetite for trying to understand, how either the forest plan revision process or existing forest plans could be used, as a foundational document to produce a fire management plan that would then allow, of course, the fire management plan in collaboration with stakeholders could then identify areas where wildfire could be used on the landscape, as well as larger landscape prescribed fire. So that's an area of interest from a NEPA policy perspective that has kind of gotten the interest. But again, we couldn't come to an agreement on what we would actually recommend to Congress. So that's one of the recommendations that did not make it in the report. So I'm cautiously optimistic for that. You will see some lawmakers, I think in California, that are interested in taking up the issue of pay and benefits for federal wildland firefighters in terms of ability to remove the 3-day break in service, for example, and make the investment in federal wildland firefighters, known that in order to keep this institutional knowledge, we have to be competitive, but we also have to expand into the mitigation, prevention, as well as post-fire. To be honest with you, Stu, I'd have to go back and look at exactly what the different recommendations are, but you'll find some nexus there that you could probably use to brief some of your California delegation in terms of what you're currently doing, and there's a nexus between what the different organizations are doing and how it supports the recommendations in the commission report. That's where I think the strength and the value of the report comes in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I totally understand the recommendation separated from the tactics that you get to, how you implement it, and I understand why you did that. I just wanted to let you know that in Region 5, California, Forest Service, the idea of a prescribed fire decision for an entire forest is in play, and so on the Mendocino, they have a prescribed fire decision that allows them to implement fire. Same with the Inyo. And there's soon to be decisions for the Sierra and Sequoia National Forests. So I'm sort of glad the commission didn't address NEPA, because there's been a lot of change in the last 3 years on how NEPA is being implemented, and it's scaling up quite a bit. And so whether you like that or not, that there are goods and bads to that, but it's happening. And so this notion of efficiency and planning is being realized so that's just FYI. I think it won't be long before we'll have prescribed fire decisions for the entire Sierra bioregion.
Do you know if that includes a natural ignition, e.g. a wildfire that can be used for resource objectives?
Well, now, right now, only on the Sierra and Sequoia can you do that. And it's covered under the forest plan.
Gotcha.
It's allowed in the forest plan. And so as we have that, so now Sierra and Sequoia will have this prescribed fire decision for an active thing. And then the unplanned, when you get the lightning, they'll be able to make decisions and manage it or not, however they feel best. So they'll be covered in both ends. Right now, the other forests are not. Inyo is covered on both sides.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's helpful.
Mhm.
Marion,
Thank you. I was just thinking maybe we were out of time and I wasn't gonna get to ask my question.
well, I'm keeping
I'm-
this
I'm here.
3:15, so
Yeah.
we have time.
Oh, okay. So I guess I missed that. So thank you so much, Kelly, for your work on the commission and for this great presentation. I saw another one from Bob Roper recently that was also great and had different focus. So I think it's worth seeing many presentations of this because there's so much in it. And to that point, one of the things that really impressed me, and I should say I'm Marion Aidney from Conservation X Labs. One of the things that impressed me about the report is exactly the decision to make recommendations based on consensus. Consensus is something that I think we have a hard time with in this country. And my question then, as you've been socializing this on the Hill and from the Capitol all the way down to the local level, which I also really appreciate your stressing. Given that wildland fire is a issue that's impacting all of us, and that there are many different approaches to how we should manage and live with it. And given that the commission did a very deep and thoughtful work that was based on consensus of very diverse members, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the reception in Washington across different perspectives, and what your advice would be for how to leverage this report on all of these different levels to bridge some of the divides that we have in how we address this issue. And then another, yeah, I'll stop there.
That's a complicated one. I will say that when we met with the Wildfire Caucus, which is House members, I think that's a really good place to start. If you haven't done so already, reach out to that delegation. Let them know who you are, that you've seen a couple of presentations on the commission report, that you're interested in, the whatever recommendations they are lumped into different buckets, if you will. So I think Congress wants, they do want to draft legislation, and they are expecting or would like constituent engagement with drafting legislation. And the fact that the commission is nonpartisan, and the fact that the Wildfire Commission is bipartisan, and there's unanimous consensus with these 148 recommendations, that has to carry some weight when we go to the Hill and try to leverage new legislation and acts of Congress. It is very difficult, and I'll just, for myself personally, I'm working on the Wildland Firefighter Pay Protection Act, both in the House and the Senate. And it is very difficult to think that you can get all members in both chambers to agree. It's very difficult. But nonetheless, it really elevates and highlights the sense of urgency with these issues. And I think that's how you can use the report. It should be seen, as a pivotal moment in time, that we are at an inflection point. And for most of us that remember the National Fire Plan from 2000, things have not fundamentally changed. As a matter of fact, they've been getting worse. And so I think you can use this report as an inflection point. If we do nothing, we know the trajectory is to continue up. If we are really focused and do the hard work in a bipartisan, nonpartisan fashion, then I'm hopeful that inflection point that we're at right now actually goes down, and that we don't see, loss of life and whole communities, taken out by the wildfire crisis, and we can come together and agree. And I think that's a very powerful starting point to contact you're in California, Marion, right?
Yeah,
So I would start there. And really, if there's another opportunity to go through, because people ask me, well, what are your top recommendations? I really don't have any. I mean, the ones that I'm most interested in is certainly, landscapes, and workforce. And so you can find lots of nexus there, but being able to assist legislative aides, with drafting legislation, I think that's a start, and that's an important nuance that we have to know that fire knows no boundaries, and somehow that we can come together in a consensus fashion. Let's hope.
Yeah.
So I'm happy about that.
that's great. I mean, congratulations for doing that. And I think that at the local level also, those recommendations should carry a lot of weight because of that.
Ellie, do you happen to know any groups that are writing bill language? Because
Not so much writing bill language, like our groups, grassroots, we will review. I'm pretty sure the members, their staff are the ones that write it, but there's so much in the report that can be used for the basis of writing legislative bills. And that's the beauty of the report, for, truly transformational changes. But locally, I think at the state level and the county level, if folks are really interested in learning to live with fire and adapting to and responding to and mitigating wildfires, I think local communities would be very interested in how do they participate, in this bigger fabric, within the, and certainly that collaboration piece that I showed earlier is an important part of that. So I think, from local elected officials to states to House and Senate, that alignment I think is extremely important.
Juliet, you had your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for doing this. And Kelly, thanks so much for taking the time and for serving on the commission. I'm maybe the oddball in the group. I am a freelance writer and a volunteer firefighter in a rural mountain community in Southern Oregon. Very concerned about the issue, both personally and also it's a topic of great interest in my writing. I've been a lurker on Smokey Wire for quite a while, just learning and reading, and I really appreciate the diverse perspectives. So I guess I'm glad you brought up the local community involvement, because I suppose that is my question, which is how can a local community such as mine stay involved and engaged in this process?
There's a guy that was on our commission, John O'Keefe. He was the president of the Oregon Cattlemen's Association. So was very active with rural communities and rural fire protection associations. So I don't know if you're involved in that, but it's very intriguing in terms of how rural fire protection associations can be first responders, if you will. I don't know the specifics of what you need for training, but I do believe the equipment comes from BLM, Bureau of Land Management. And so under the RFPA, that people in these really remote rural locations can and should play a part, as a first responder to an incipient wildfire. Because as you know, there's probably, the closest fire station could be an hour and a half away. And so having local participation and collaboration at that level is really, really important. So I would recommend that. I also know that there's groups out there that are forming prescribed burn associations. So private landowners are getting more of an opportunity to participate as a prescribed burner, for example. I love it. A couple of years ago, a friend of mine said, federal agencies don't own fire. And so landowners who are interested in getting the training and being able to form a collaborative at a local level, a rural local level, is also an opportunity for you to get engaged to both from a response standpoint of view, and then also from a prescribed fire standpoint of view. So I think that's how you can get engaged.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I've actually met John before, so I could reach out to him.
Yeah, track him down. I really enjoyed working with him. He's got lots of great, ideas, and it was a real pleasure working with him as well.
Tim has another question, I think. Oh, there we go. Yay. Tim.
Yeah, I was just curious about your meetings in DC with committees and staffers. I mean, given the state of Congress, yeah, but it's good investment for the next Congress, perhaps. But just can you elaborate a little bit more on like who you talked with and what they were really interested in? Is there any possibility we might see some congressional action on any of these recommendations?
Oh, sure. And again, I wish I had the crosswalk between what actually ended up in the 117th, what's in the 118th. That's has a direct nexus to the commission report. I think we all kind of know that, I don't know if this figure is correct or not, but only 10% of the bills ever introduced ever make it into law. So that's somewhat problematic. But I think it feels like the perspective of introducing bills really telegraphs the elected official, the congressional member, what they stand for and what they're interested in pursuing. And I'll be honest, a lot of these legislative aides and or staffers, they have no clue about fire, let alone the elected officials. I won't say that about the Wildfire Commission, or caucus, I'm sorry, the Wildfire Caucus, the House Wildfire Caucus. They do know, and they're mostly Western delegate. So I think, and they're both Republicans and Democrats, and they want to see, some kind of consensus building around this issue. So I'm an eternal optimist. So I am optimistic that, like the Wildland Fire Pay Protection Act has both sponsors from the Democrats and the Republicans. So I am kind of seeing some telegraphing that Dems and Republicans do want to work together on the wildfire crisis. But it's hard. It's hard. I mean, there's just, there's people that are really, vying for screen time or media time, and, either for or against, something. So I am not the expert, in this arena of elected officials and how to, kind of get interest. But, obviously wildfire polls well with elected officials. And so creating briefing papers, position papers that are tied to the commission report, I think are very powerful, because elected officials want to serve their constituents. And that's where I think the power of the people really come in that, the more groups that can, identify with some of these recommendations, I think Congress is ready to introduce bills. I just can't tell you, I have no crystal ball as to, how they get through committee to vote to the Senate, to the president. It's a long slog, but if nothing else, I think people are becoming much, much more educated, on the wildfire crisis.
I think it might just click off at 3:15, and if so, thank you to everybody. But if not, we can keep going until it clicks off. And I will have learned several things. Enable a chat first and leave more time. Michael, do you have a question?
Bye, Tim.
Unmute yourself. Bye, Tim.
Unmute.
Sue's got to go
Yeah,
too.
there you go.
I'm going to be really quick, and
Hi,
it
Sue.
has to
Thank
do
you.
with the conversation that Sue had. I'm sorry she dropped off, and Bob, and that I did. There is where she says there's a group in California that really believe that managed fire is appropriate and all that. There is also a strong group that believes that it absolutely is foolish, especially during these times. And so the idea of active forest maintenance and not putting out the fire with an incredibly strong initial attack immediately under these certain circumstances, there's such a difference of opinion. And I hope we can stay together and manage these differences of opinion, because at the end of the day, the American people are wanting to be protected. And so that's one area that's really, really volatile, and we just need to try to keep working on it. And I was a deputy chief, and I was in charge of the fire program, and I was the author of the National Fire Plan. So I know what's happening out there, and in California especially. I mean, I know I live there, and I just hope that we can stay together as even with differences, so we can begin to address this critical national emergency. And I do appreciate the work of the commission, and Kelly, what you just did was fabulous. So count me in to be helpful as I can be, because I'm dedicated to this cause.
Thank you,
I
Michael.
appreciate that, Michael. Yeah, for sure.
I think Lem has a question, and that's his first.
Yeah.
So yay. Let's go, Lem.
Thanks, Sharon.
Liam or
Hi,
Liam?
Kelly. Yeah, exactly.
Liam?
Yep.
Did I get it
And
right?
I
Okay.
think exactly, yeah,
Sorry.
Liam. And no worries. I know it's the name's becoming more popular, so more and more people are pronouncing it. But I usually get Lime, Torfy, Trophy, stuff like that.
Okay.
Kelly, I think we may have been in the same event with the Federation of American Scientists at
Oh, yeah,
Rayburn
of course.
here in DC.
Yeah.
Yeah, Marion and I we're with Conservation X Labs, and we've been working with FAS we were submitting some input to the commission, and we were particularly dealing around the cultural burning recommendations. So thank you for your work and for the report. My question was just, what actions do you foresee the commission or individual commission members taking after the commission formally ends in March? Do you foresee any kind of body coming out of this, or just individual members continuing with their own work and using their experience?
That's a really good question. I jokingly said that, to my fellow commission members that I was on the verge of starting my own lobbying firm, and no one laughed. And I said, no one's laughing. And then they laughed, and they're like, "We thought you were serious," So I enjoy the fact that, Federation of American Scientists or groups that I can come talk to and provide the context of my 35 years of experience as a wildland firefighter in an effort for people to make better informed decisions and to create policy. I really, aside from, living through this for my whole career, I don't know what happened here. Hang on a second. I really appreciate talking to people that are interested and curious about wildland fire. And it does my heart good to know that there's people out there that are inquisitive, that I can maybe provide information that they can then do more investigative, work, or economics analysis. That's what I really enjoy. But to say that I know what's going to come after March is a good question. There's one person in California that's running for a congressional seat. So I think those of us that are interested in politics and policy and reforms, I see opportunities there. You probably remember America Burning. That actually was the basis that formed the U.S. Fire Administration. So in terms of true transformations that will come out of this report, similar as to what came out of the congressional report of America Burning in I think it was the 40s or 50s, maybe the 50s. I can't say right now, but I if I had
Yeah.
a crystal ball, I do think there's some probably major transformations to come, but I can't tell you what those are right now. But I love working with groups that are really truly inquisitive about, you know, what it's been like as a wildland firefighter, and, you know, what are the things that we need to be paying attention to now and into the future.
Definitely. And it was a really amazing group with the commission. I mean, ranging all the way up to the secretaries to
Yeah.
everywhere
Yeah.
in between. So I imagine that was a great experience. But thank you again for your work. And yeah, I'm
Yeah,
excited to
thank you.
see what comes after.
Well, there is a group, and Napster is on it, and it's run out of the Forest Stewards Guild. And I think it's Wildfire Resilience, something or other, with the idea of influencing Congress. But sadly, I can't remember exactly the name of it, so you can't look it up. And when I just looked up Wildfire Resilience, I got the Moore Foundation and like 15 Wildfire Resilience collaboratives. So I can't think of the name of it, but there is somebody out there. There's a lot of people out there, which, Kelly, is my question. Is it seems like everyone has decided to jump into the wildfire space. And was there any discussion of coordinating all these, how you would go about coordinating all these different people, entities, companies, corporations, military industrial complex, you know, all those people that have suddenly gotten into the business so that they're not floundering all over the place?
Yeah, really, really good point. I especially see that in technology development, you know, be it a private. I think some of you may be aware of what is it called, the X Prize or something, the X Wildfire Prize, or, you know, looking at you know, innovative ideas for fire. So that's out there. I really don't. I guess what feels like a glue to me is the cohesive strategy. So, and they're meeting next week in Santa Fe, I believe. So I'm cautiously optimistic that, you know, that could kind of act as somewhat of a portal for all these desperate different kinds of, you know, emerging and startups. But it's a really good question, because it's overwhelming for me to try to keep track of all the different you know, groups and people that are working in this sphere. But you're right. I think there's a lot of money coming down within the bipartisan infrastructure law as well as the IRA. So a lot of folks are really going after, you know, grant funding and money in different ways. And is there value there? I'm not really the one to make that kind of assessment, but with that kind of money going out to kind of quote unquote address or solve the wildfire crisis, you can imagine that some of that's not going to be spent wisely as well. But yeah, that's the only thing I can in WIFLIC, but I don't really, I think the National Association of State Foresters is a very powerful, influential group, because, you know, wildfires really do impact states, and having states on board with any sort of emerging transformations, they also have to be a part of that and a key player. You know, if state budgets haven't really kept up with wildfires and paying people and being able to, you know, meet the current and future challenges, I think state governments and state legislatures also need to get on board. And they're even less informed to a large degree. You know, I don't want to throw that blanket out there, but they're also asking for more information at a state level on what state legislatures can do.
Oh, great. Michael, do you have another question? Oh, you'll have to unmute yourself. I guess.
I think that thank you for that coordination question, because last 3 years have been about 70 of us, and, you know, really some pretty skilled people. They've been working on a document, it addresses our forests, and it's called A Call to Action. And some of us are working directly with members on the Hill, both the Senate side and the House side, to try to get increased money for forest maintenance, for example. And we want to be absolutely in lockstep with, so as time goes on, if we can, you know, Kelly, if you can give us some ideas on how we can stay exactly in coordination with you, boy, we sure would like to do that. So thanks for bringing that up, Sharon.
Yeah, well, let me give you a couple of thoughts. I'm a huge proponent of thinking about what we can do to enhance rural jobs as well as put youth to work. And I would love to see a program that senior high school students could come out already willing and able to go work for a Fed agency or a state agency. They just go to a recruitment center or whatever they call it, but that young kids that may not want to go on to college, and so they should be able to find a job, you know, at a state level. If state's going to be doing mitigation work in a local community where kids need to, you can form a fuels crew or a forestry crew or a watershed crew. These kids should be able to come out of high school and have a job as soon as they walk out. So I think of course, this is important for both Republicans and Democrats, but I think in particular, Republicans are very interested in how they can support the development of rural jobs. Housing is a huge issue. Young people these days, they know they can't afford rent. They can't buy a house. And so I think we really need to laser focus and talk to some of our young folks and ask them, you know, well, I've asked them, they would love nothing more than to be able to like select different conservation, natural resource, or fire jobs throughout the West. And it doesn't even have to be out the West. It could be anywhere in the US. But if they knew that they could go from different jobs and take their camper van or sprinter van or trailer or tiny home, you know, to a community, that's really intriguing to a lot of people. So what does that look like? I would love nothing more than to see a federal, state, private partnership that we develop. I know it's going to get contentious. A responder RV park, and there's water, there's electric, there's hookup, there's a community area that people can gather. It really reduces the housing burden for people that are only making $15 to $20 an hour. So if you really want to increase the recruitment of young people into this workforce, and we all know that labor statistics are showing less and less people willing to do arduous outdoor jobs. And so we have to really think of creative ways to, you know, get this next generation excited about natural resource management. We need them. It's their world. They're inheriting this. We ought to, you know, deference to them in terms of, you know, they're the next workforce. But if I went to the county commissioners, do you think they would support a 50 space RV park for emergency responders that would include, you know, federal, state, SIPA, well, I'm here in Idaho, Southern Idaho Timber Protection Association, you know, because that's the first thing young people ask is does the job come with housing? So I think your group, Michael, could be quite instrumental in thinking about creative ways. The other thing that you may know more about than I do is that I don't believe the feds can obtain FEMA trailers, but maybe the states can. And in this idyllic world of an emergency responder RV park, that you could have a number of state would obtain the surplus FEMA trailers. The federal government is not the best agency to be in the housing business. So I'd really put that back on a local community as a potential business opportunity for locals to manage that. So those are some ideas that I've thought about in terms of, I would love nothing more to know that, you know, I have an influence on an 18-year-old that, you know, wants to do this. I loved my work. I loved my career. I can't imagine having done anything else, even remotely anything else, than running around in the woods all through my 20s and 30s. It was truly, truly such a tremendous opportunity to work on public lands. And I would love to just see that reinvigorated at a, you know, exponential rate, that, you know, we can get kids out of, Bitcoin and, now I'm kind of showing my prejudice here, but just working in a natural resource management field is just so fulfilling after a lifetime of, dedication. It's just, I really want to see young people, consider this as a viable career option. We that have spent our entire careers in this field need to think about how we can support them.
Thank you.
So sorry, Bob, time is kind of running out here. So on that very positive note of a thing that everyone I think can agree on, I think I'd like to bring this to a close and wish everybody a happy Friday. And if you have ideas that you haven't been able to express, you can always write to me at the Smokey Wire, and I will post what you are thinking. And with that, happy Friday, everybody. And thank you, Kelly.
Oh, my pleasure. I just want to thank all of you for engaging in a really, rich and sometimes contentious debate. And that's fine. I think in the United States, we've lost the ability for creative and artful and respectful debate. And we just need to, reemphasize that it's okay. Debate is good. And I appreciate your time. And thank you, Sharon, for hosting this. And I'll keep track of y'all on the Smokey Wire.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Sharon.
Thank you,